Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marlins Monday. As always, my name is Eric Wiedeke. You can follow me on X/Twitter at Eric Wiedeke. Lots to talk about here on this Marlins Monday. It is July 21st, the first Monday post All-Star break, and there's a ton of content to get into here. But before we do that, I do just want to encourage everyone to like, comment, and subscribe here on the videos for 5 Reasons Sports Network YouTube channel. It does help grow what we do here, covering the most South Florida sports between the Marlins, the Heat, the Dolphins, the Hurricanes, the Panthers, Inter Miami. If you can name it, it's on 5 Reasons Sports Network, some of the best coverage here in South Florida. So please do support what we do as it helps grow the reach. All right, so it's been a interesting week for the Marlins here. Obviously, you had the All-Star break, and I do just want to congratulate Kyle Stowers once again for making the All-Star game, and I'm sure making some memories that he'll never forget, homering in the swing-off, definitely being among them as one of the cooler moments for him this season. But speaking of cool moments, that first game against Kansas City out of the break, to go yard twice again, another walk-off bomb for Kyle Stowers. The guy's just been unbelievable this season. He continues to stay hot out of the break. The Royals, on Saturday, they legitimately feared the guy. They intentionally walked him in that clutch spot before Otto Lopez, put one right up against the wall out in left field. But still, it just kind of shows you the respect that a guy like Kyle Stowers is getting. And I think we'll continue to get, especially depending on who you have hitting behind him in certain situations. And we'll end up getting into that here shortly. But I do just want to start by giving Kyle Stowers his flowers. He's continued his hot play here through the break. 0 for on Sunday, but, for the most part, he had a tremendous series against Kansas City. Marlins had a strong series against Kansas City in general, winning 2 out of 3 before getting kind of summarily dismissed on Sunday. Chris Bubich just completely shut them down. Made a mini rally there in the 9th inning, but it was not enough as Jansen Junk just did not have his best stuff. It seems like with Jansen that's kind of when he gets in trouble. He's just such a prolific strike thrower that at certain points his stuff isn't necessarily overwhelming, so teams can kind of ambush him and really hit him. And that's where, one of my things with Junk is he's been such a really good pitcher. And in terms of just, knowing what to throw and when, I think he can get a little too aggressive when things are going well. As a lot of pitchers can, because he was really cruising, and I think maybe he kind of took for granted that, I just need to throw strikes. And eventually the Royals started making really solid contact. But, these things happen. Junk, outside of 2 starts, has been phenomenal for the Marlins, so I'm not necessarily sounding the alarms off on that yet. But a couple of things that I do want to touch on here in terms of, it's been mostly positive out of the break. I do think that there are some things that you would want to talk about here. Firstly, something that I did notice on Saturday as I was at the game, and it was a phenomenal game. The crowds were great all weekend, by the way. I think people are really starting to catch on to this team here in South Florida as they create some buzz for themselves with their strong play of late. But, I saw Ronnie Enriquez kind of get that 8th inning where he gave up the game-tying homer to Sal Perez. And I just don't understand why he's not your permanent 9th inning guy at this point. I understand that maybe there's certain guys that you want to showcase in that role for trade purposes. But I think teams have seen plenty as far as that stuff goes. So I think the time for showcasing is kind of over there because teams know what they're getting out of a guy like Foucher, for example, if they're going to trade for him, or Bender, if he's going to be traded for. He's been fantastic. He got the save on Saturday, and I would expect that he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of calls and is very heavily coveted at the trade deadline. as he's just been one of the best relievers in baseball, period, this season. And then the other thing that I've really noticed over the course of, I have eyes. You don't need to really be looking too hard to notice it. But you've got Eric Wagaman and Dane Myers both really, really going through it right now. Eric Wagaman, I don't understand what he does. If I'm honest, what does he bring this baseball team right now? He's not a particularly good fielder. He's not quick on the base paths. He's not a hit for power guy. Certainly, he's got a lower slugging percentage than Xavier Edwards at this point. He's not a hit for average guy either. Sure, maybe he's a good locker room or a good clubhouse guy, and he's a positive force. But okay, then he's a bench bat, a corner infield bench guy. He's not a guy that you're starting. He's not even a guy that you're really platooning, because I'd rather see Liam Hicks against lefties. I don't care if the numbers don't look great against lefties this season. It's barely been a sizable sample size. And I think Hicks just has a better approach. When I'm looking at guys in terms of platooning versus not, one of the things that I think really matters here is I think that there are certain guys that are kind of platoon proof just because of the way that they go about their at-bats. And I think Hicks would prove to be one of those guys because of the feel for the strike zone that he has, because he has such a low K rate and he's able to put wood on the baseball. He's a guy that I think it's not really going to matter down the line, lefty or righty. I think he's going to kind of just do what he does. And let's put the ball in play. Eric Wagaman putting the ball in play right now, but it just feels like everything that he hits is either skied 60, 70 feet in the air on a pop-up, or he's beating it into the ground for a weak grounder. Right now, if I'm looking at a guy that in terms of just roster spot here after the deadline, not because I think he's going to get traded, but I think he's at real risk for, a demotion here, and maybe even an outright DFA, because honestly, I don't think I would want him taking at bats over Troy Johnston or Davison De Los Santos at AAA. And it's not to say that I'm rooting for that. I mean, you never root for somebody to lose their job. I'd like to see him playing well, but right now he's not giving your team anything. He's got a negative WAR, and I just fail to see how he positively contributes to the baseball team right now. At least with Dane Myers, he still gives you tremendous defense out in center field, even though he's giving you not much at the plate right now. You feel for him because on Sunday he hit the ball hard a few times, didn't get much for it, but right now it's just he's another guy that's just not squaring the baseball up. And with Dane, it's unfortunate because it really does seem like the case of a guy that maybe isn't a full-time player. He's just one of those guys. He's a really good fourth outfielder. I think maybe he can be, a guy that you can bring in and start maybe 2 out of every 5 games. And in those really short doses, be super effective for you, to the point where he tempts you to want to make him a starter full-time. But I mean, until he shows that he can do it, right now I don't necessarily think that he should have that role, unquestionably so. And that leads me into my next topic here, which is there's a prospect down at AAA really making a push for promotion, and I think we're on the verge of seeing it here sooner than later, and that's one Jacob Marcy at AAA Jacksonville. You go back over his last 44 games here, he's hitting .309 with a .399 on base, .574 slugging, 10 homers, 13 steals, and he plays a tremendous center field. Marcy's always been kind of a guy that's had a decent hit tool, really good speed, really good glove. The power's always kind of been so-so, but it seems like he's starting to really get that slug. And it's not like he doesn't have, the body for any power. He's 6 foot 190. So he's a guy that I think as he grows and kind of fills out his frame, maybe settles in at 200, 205 pounds, could be a guy that can have 20 to 25 homer power. The approach at the plate is fantastic. He's got an elite eye, and I think that that's something that usually tends to translate really well. You look at Liam Hicks as a guy that really kind of had a similar profile to Jacob Marcy, maybe a little bit less power as a hitter, and he's been fantastic since he's come up, and been selected in the Rule 5 draft by the Marlins. So I think Jacob Marcy is a guy that's really making a push, and I'd like to see him get that opportunity to really take that center field position and run with it, because it is one of the few positions that I think the Marlins really don't have, a set in stone future at right now. I think that there are three. I think it's center field, I think it's first base, and I think it's third base. Your corners and your center field, because I think at the other positions you can make a case that there are guys that are either ready to come up or guys that you feel comfortable with starting at this point. And I don't see that at center field, and I'd like to see Jacob Marcy get the opportunity to come up and show what he's done. I mean, this is a 44-game stretch. This isn't, something that he's just done over, 10, 15, 20 games, and he's been hot. And, this has been a sizable stretch for him, and it's really just a magnification of the player that he's always been. This isn't a guy that's got a really high strikeout rate that's all of a sudden not striking out. I mean, sure, that happens too, and guys progress, but this is a guy that's always had a really good eye at the dish, and has always kind of had a decent hit tool, just growing in that and making that going from a plus to an elite tool for him. So I think Jacob Marcy is a guy that I'd really, really like to see come up for this Marlins team. And then another topic that I saw that I didn't think I would have to broach, but I've seen whispers kind of on social media about, the Marlins should buy, because, it's baseball is a game in which there are no guarantees, and you don't know what next year is going to look like, and you may as well strike while the iron's hot. And they've been one of the best teams in all of baseball over the last 33 games or so. And I don't know if I can agree with that sentiment just yet. Maybe if they sweep San Diego and they, if they really get hot here going into the deadline to the point where they're 500 or better going into it, sure, maybe you can talk me into it at that point. But right now, I don't see how it would be helpful. Because I think, number one, I still don't think they have the blue chip prospects to really make an impact. Sure, you have Thomas White, but why would you trade Thomas White right now? Because he's kind of the only, Thomas White is kind of in a tier of his own, and then it's Joe Mack. But Thomas White is really the only tier one, upper level prospect that you have right now. And I just don't think you can part with that, because you just don't have that depth in the organization yet. Sure, you have the guys that you just drafted, but I think you'd want to get some early returns on them at least before you make that kind of a call. And then the other thing there is, I still think that the foundation's not there just yet. I think they're close. I think you're establishing foundation between X and Otto and Kyle and Ramirez and Yuri and maybe even Edward Cabrera. I think the rotation is going to be good next year. I think the bullpen, they just find a way to create a great bullpen every year. But it's really just finding that first baseman, that third baseman, and that third outfielder. and kind of rolling the dice from there. And so I think you should continue to be sellers. I'm not advocating for a full-on teardown, but I think you move Sandy, you move one of Cabrera and Junk, because I think one of those two guys is going to regress to kind of what they've been in their careers. Not to say that I think that that's a failure of the Marlins coaching staff or anything like that. I just, how likely is it really that both of those guys are going to be plus starting pitchers for you going forward? You probably sell on one of your relievers. Anthony Bender, I think it's the time to move him specifically, just because he is having such a great season and you can capitalize on his value right now to get a really solid return. I think Jesus Sanchez is the guy that gets moved at this deadline. And I think you can create the necessary depth in your organization with just moving those guys. If you were to move just those four pieces, I think you're there in terms of the foundation of where you want to be, because not only are you adding to your organizational depth, you're creating space for some of your prospects to come up and kind of show you what they can do in post deadline. The Jacob Marcy's, maybe Davison De Los Santos gets a call. Maybe Maximo Acosta gets a call, and he's been, performing better of late in AAA. So I do think that I understand the optimism. Believe me, I'm as bullish on the Marlins right now as just about anybody. But I think that they're going to be patient with this, and I would advocate them to do so because I think that they're close, and I don't know if you want to really try to speed that up. I think you start adding talent this offseason, especially if they continue to play well in the second half, because I think that that's where you can say, okay, well, this season can be a jumping off point. I think if they play their cards right, this could be the last selling deadline they have for 3, 4, 5 seasons. But it's all, hinging on them playing their cards right and being smart about this. And I think that that's what they'll do. I mean, they're clear-eyed about where they stand right now. They're still 7.5 games out of the wild card. As nice as this is and as fun as this is, you don't want to jump the gun. I think about what the Orioles did in trading for Corbin Burns and then not extending him, and where they are this season, and they're starting pitching kind of suffering. Not to say that, they've had their share of injuries, and it's not to say that Corbin Burns deal sunk them, but I do think that they're kind of a cautionary tale of what happens when you try to hit the fast forward button a little bit too much. And I understand that they won 100 games last year, but they probably weren't that good. I think that there was a little bit of a regression to the mean coming with them, but I don't think it should have hit them as hard as it did this year. And I think that part of that is them kind of, really going all in when they could have waited just a little bit longer and really seized that opportunity. And I think that the Marlins are in a position to do the same thing and just be patient with it. Let this thing cook. Don't pop it in the microwave. This is something that you have to let bake, and I trust them to do so. I would still sell. Maybe there's a strategic buy out there where there's a guy that, hey, we think this guy can help us beyond 2025. And that I'm good with, because you do have some players in the minors that have very similar skill sets, a little bit of redundancy. That I understand completely, but that's different from, hey, we want to make a run in 2025. Like, I'm not here for rentals right now. I don't think the Marlins should be either. But it's going to be an interesting week upcoming for the Marlins, facing off against San Diego with Yuri, Cabrera, and Sandy going on the mound. Hope to see more people still coming out to the ballpark supporting this team as they're playing very good baseball, even despite a disappointing loss on Sunday. Hopefully Cabrera comes out and pitches well. A lot of eyes are going to be on that following, leaving the start in Baltimore his last time with some elbow discomfort. So we'll keep tabs on that, and I will see you guys next Monday with more Marlins talk, more rumors, more breakdown, more discussion, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and give me a follow on X/Twitter at Eric Wiedeke. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.